I'm Sierra, and I will be going over how to do Standard 1. In Standard 1, we will be learning to read, write, and interpret the domain and range of functions using interval notations. In other words, we will be learning how to graph equations, find where the graph does or does not touch the x and y axis, and identifying each part in the equation. We will start off with some vocabulary. When finding the range, we will be looking at the graph from up and down as it approaches the x-axis. Finding the domain, we will be watching the graph from left to right as it approaches the y-axis. We will start this problem out by graphing it. When you put it in your graphing calculator, make sure your x minus 10 is in parentheses. Something to know. When you see an expression like this, always do the opposite of what the sign says. In this case, you're going negative 10, so you move to the right 10. If you have a negative, you go to the positive side of the graph, or the right. If you have a positive, you go to the negative side of the graph, or the left. After you're done graphing, it's time to find the domain. You'll notice that approaching from each side of the graph never touches 10. So that means coming from this side, you go from negative infinity to 10, and then it picks up again from 10 to infinity. Now we are looking at the range. As we can see from the graph approaching from either up or down, it never reaches 0, making the range negative infinity to 0 and picking back up at 0 to infinity. After graphing and finding where the graph does not come to the axis, we come to our answer. The domain of negative infinity to 10 union 10 to infinity, and the range negative infinity to 0 union 0 to infinity. While identifying what D does to the graph, D changes where on the y-axis the graph starts. That being said, if D would equal 2, the graph would be up 2 from the 0 on the y-axis. D affects the range because wherever D is, that's where the graph comes to on the range. C changes how far over the graph goes on left to right, but remember, always the opposite of what the sign says. C would affect the domain by how far left or right it allows the graph to come. While graphing problem 3, make sure if you put it in your graphing calculator to put the x minus 5 in parentheses. This is what your graph should look like after graphing it in your graphing calculator. Because negative 1 in this case is your D value, you'll notice that your range goes from negative infinity to 1 and 1 to infinity. Negative 5 is your C value. Because it is negative, it moves to the right 5, making your domain negative infinity to 5, 5 to infinity. The first step to problem 4 is identifying two key details about the graph. It has a direct starting point, unlike other graphs. 2, it goes to infinity in one direction. Just like in problem 2, D moves the starting point on the y-axis, and the range is affected by where D comes to from the up or down direction. Also like problem 2, C moves the starting point left or right, meaning that the domain is affected by where C starts to infinity. In problem 5, we're looking for the absolute value. The absolute value makes a V-shaped graph. A will be determining how narrow or wide the V graph is. In problem 5, just like 2 and 4, C and D have the same effect on the graph. D will affect the range by how far up or down the graph is moved. However, C in this case does not affect the domain because it goes from infinity in both directions.